In a dramatic escalation of the ongoing conflict in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso's military has reported a major confrontation with jihadist terrorists in the northern province of Somme, near the border with Mali. Sources within the Burkinabe armed forces claim that after hours of intense gun battles, government troops have begun reclaiming territory that has been under jihadist control for several years. The operation, which unfolded amid heightened tensions, marks a potential turning point in the country's protracted struggle against insurgent groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Eyewitness accounts and preliminary military dispatches indicate that the encounter began in the early hours of the morning, around 4 a.m. local time, when a convoy of Burkinabe soldiers patrolling the outskirts of the town of Djibo stumbled upon a jihadist outpost. What started as a routine reconnaissance mission quickly devolved into a protracted firefight, lasting over 6 hours and involving heavy artillery, machine guns, and improvised explosive devices, IEDs, deployed by the militants. The jihadists, believed to be members of the Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, an al-Qaeda-linked coalition that has dominated much of northern Burkina Faso since 2017, put up fierce resistance from fortified positions in the arid scrubland. According to unverified reports from local villagers who fled the area, the jihadists had been using the territory as a staging ground for raids on nearby communities, extracting taxes from residents, and launching attacks on military outposts. This particular swath of land, encompassing several villages and key water sources, has been under insurgent control since at least 2020, when JNIM forces overran government defenses during a wave of offensives that displaced thousands. The group's grip on the region has allowed them to establish parallel governance structures, including Sharia courts and recruitment drives, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis that has left over 2 million Burkinabe internally displaced. As the gunfight intensified, Burkinabe forces, bolstered by recent reinforcements from the military junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, called in aerial support from drone units and helicopter gunships. Witnesses described scenes of chaos, plumes of smoke rising from exploded vehicles, the constant rattle of automatic gunfire echoing across the desert landscape, and jihadist fighters retreating under pressure. The soldiers came in waves, pushing forward despite the ambushes, said one anonymous local herder who spoke to reporters via phone from a displacement camp. We've lived in fear for years, but today it felt like the tide might be turning. The operation comes against a backdrop of mounting frustration within Burkina Faso's military ranks. Since the 2022 coup that installed Traoré's regime, the government has vowed a total war against jihadist groups, enlisting civilian militias known as Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, VDPs, to supplement regular troops. However, these efforts have been marred by setbacks, including a major JNIM assault in May 2025 that temporarily seized the provincial capital of Djibo, exposing vulnerabilities in supply lines and intelligence gathering. Critics, including international observers, have pointed to allegations of human rights abuses by both sides, with VDPs accused of retaliatory raids on Fulani communities suspected of harboring jihadists, further fueling ethnic tensions. In recent months, the conflict has spilled over into neighboring countries, with JNIM and its rival, the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISGS, vying for dominance in the tri-border area shared by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The withdrawal of French forces in 2023 and the expulsion of UN peacekeepers have left a security vacuum, allowing jihadists to expand their operations. Burkina Faso's military, strained by limited resources and desertions, has increasingly turned to Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group, now rebranded as Africa Corps, for training and equipment, a move that has drawn international scrutiny but provided a boost to operational capabilities. Today's clashes highlight the high stakes involved. Casualty figures remain unclear, but initial estimates suggest dozens of jihadists killed or captured, with Burkinabe forces suffering lighter losses thanks to superior firepower. Military spokespersons have described the reclamation as a strategic victory, noting that secured areas could disrupt jihadist supply routes for Mali. Yet, the situation on the ground remains fluid, with reports of jihadist reinforcements mobilizing from nearby strongholds. Tensions are palpably high, as sporadic gunfire continues and residents brace for potential counterattacks. Analysts warn that while this engagement may represent a rare win for the Burkinabe soldiers, the broader insurgency shows no signs of abating. NIM's resilience stems from deep-rooted grievances, including poverty, marginalization of nomadic groups, and climate-induced resource scarcity in the Sahel. The group's propaganda machine has already begun framing the battle as a martyrdom operation, potentially inspiring further recruitment. As night falls, Burkinabe troops are fortifying their positions, digging in for what could be a prolonged standoff. As dawn broke over the embattled northern fringes of Burkina Faso, government forces continued their advance into jihadist-held territory in Somme province, building on the momentum from yesterday's prolonged gun battles. Military sources on the ground report that Burkinabe soldiers have secured additional villages overnight, encountering diminished resistance from JNIM militants who appear increasingly disorganized and outmatched. This shift in dynamics is being attributed by top commanders to the sweeping security reforms spearheaded by Captain Ibrahim Traoré since his ascent to power in September 2022, which have infused the armed forces with unprecedented resources, advanced equipment, and strategic capabilities. Traoré's regime, born out of frustration with previous governments' inability to stem the jihadist tide, has prioritized a radical overhaul of the security sector. In the wake of the 2022 coup, the junta allocated a staggering portion of the national budget, estimated at over 25% in recent fiscal years, to military spending, dwarfing investments in other areas and drawing both praise and criticism for its single-minded focus on counterinsurgency. Funds have been pumped into procurement programs, training initiatives, and alliances that have transformed Burkina Faso's ragtag defenses into a more formidable apparatus. We've gone from reacting to attacks to dictating the terms of engagement, a senior officer embedded with the troops told reporters via satellite link, speaking on condition of anonymity. This financial injection, sourced partly from nationalized gold mining revenues and international partnerships, has enabled the acquisition of cutting-edge gadgets and weaponry that jihadists, reliant on smuggled arms and rudimentary tactics, simply cannot counter effectively. Central to these enhancements has been the rapid modernization of equipment under Traoré's directive. In early 2025, Burkina Faso took delivery of mine-resistant ambush-protected (MRAP) vehicles, designed to withstand the IEDs and roadside bombs that have long plagued patrols in the Sahel's unforgiving terrain. These armored behemoths, sourced through opaque deals with foreign suppliers, have proven instrumental in yesterday's operation, allowing convoys to breach jihadist lines without the catastrophic losses seen in prior engagements. Soldiers recounted how the vehicles shrugged off multiple detonations during the initial assault, enabling rapid troop deployment and fire support that caught militants off guard. Complementing this are advanced drone fleets, including surveillance and strike models, which have provided real-time intelligence and precision airstrikes. Acquired amid Traoré's pivot away from Western partners, most notably the expulsion of French forces in 2023, these drones have been integrated into operations with training from Russian advisors from the Africa Corps, formerly Wagner Group. In the Somme clashes, drone operators reportedly identified jihadist reinforcements hours before they could mobilize, neutralizing key positions with minimal collateral damage. Beyond hardware, Traoré's reforms have emphasized human capital and logistical backbone. Massive recruitment drives have swelled the ranks of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, VDPs, civilian auxiliaries now equipped with night vision goggles, encrypted communication devices, and body armor, gadgets that were once rarities in Burkina Faso's arsenal. Funding surges have also facilitated specialized counter-terrorism training camps, where soldiers learn asymmetric warfare tactics tailored to the jihadists' hit-and-run style. The money poured in has meant better pay, better morale, and better tools, noted a defense analyst monitoring the region. This has eroded the jihadists' traditional advantages, their knowledge of the local landscape and ability to blend into communities. With enhanced signals intelligence gadgets intercepting militant communications, Burkinabe forces have preempted ambushes, turning what could have been a drawn-out siege into a rout. The jihadists, once dominant in Somme since their 2020 offensives, now find themselves powerless against this upgraded foe. Reports from the front describe JNIM fighters abandoning heavy weapons and fleeing on motorcycles, their IED networks disrupted by electronic jammers deployed by government troops. They hit us hard, but our gadgets failed them. Drones spotting us from miles away, vehicles that won't blow up, a captured militant allegedly confessed during preliminary interrogations, according to military leaks. This vulnerability stems from the insurgents' reliance on outdated Soviet-era arms and improvised explosives, which pale against Traoré's tech-infused strategy. Analysts point out that while JNIM has expanded operations across the tri-border area with Mali and Niger, the concentrated push in Burkina Faso has exposed cracks in their command structure, exacerbated by the regime's aggressive propaganda campaigns that undermine recruitment. Yet, as the operation presses on, challenges loom. Ethnic tensions, fueled by past VDP reprisals against Fulani populations suspected of jihadist sympathies, could complicate consolidation efforts. International observers warn that the financial strain of these enhancements, coupled with allegations of human rights abuses and disinformation tactics, might alienate communities needed for long-term stability. On the ground, soldiers remain vigilant, with sporadic skirmishes reported as jihadists attempt to regroup in the dense bush. Reinforcements from Ouagadougou are en route, equipped with the latest thermal imaging devices to maintain the nighttime edge. With reinforcements bolstering frontline positions in Somme province, Burkina Faso's military has expanded its footprint into additional jihadist enclaves, reporting the capture of key logistical hubs that JNIM militants had used for arms smuggling and recruitment. As the dust settles from the initial clashes, military strategists and international observers are increasingly optimistic that this encounter could catalyze a cascade of victories, potentially eradicating terrorist threats within months and repositioning Burkina Faso as a stable hub for regional development. The momentum, fueled by Captain Ibrahim Traoré's security enhancements, is seen as a harbinger of sweeping changes that could lift the nation from global bad lists of high-risk zones, unlocking doors to investment and prosperity long stifled by insurgency. The bad lists in question encompass a range of international designations that have plagued Burkina Faso for years, including the U.S. State Department's Level 4 Do Not Travel Advisory, the European Union's terrorism watch lists, and the World Bank's classifications of fragile and conflict-affected states. These labels, imposed amid the jihadist surge that began intensifying in 2015, have deterred foreign aid, tourism, and private sector engagement, contributing to an economic contraction where GDP growth has hovered below 2% annually despite abundant gold and agricultural resources. Experts argue that the recent operation's success, marked by the reclamation of over 500 square kilometers in just 48 hours, demonstrates a newfound military prowess that could prompt swift re-evaluations. If Burkina Faso sustains this trajectory, we could see downgrades in risk assessments by early 2026, said a Brussels-based security consultant familiar with EU policies. Such a shift would not only ease travel restrictions but also restore eligibility for multilateral loans and grants, previously withheld due to governance and security concerns. Building on this pivotal encounter, Burkinabe forces are projecting a series of targeted offensives in the coming months, aiming to dismantle NIM's remaining strongholds in the Est and Nord regions. Intelligence briefs leaked to local media outline a phase strategy. Phase 1, already underway, focuses on border interdiction with Mali to sever supply lines. Phase 2, slated for October, involves joint operations with VDP militias to flush out urban hideouts in towns like Kaya and Dori. And Phase 3, by December, targets the tri-border nexus with Niger, where ISGS remnants have intermingled with JNIM cells. Enhanced equipment, including satellite-guided munitions and AI-driven threat detection systems acquired through Russian and Chinese partnerships, is expected to minimize casualties while maximizing territorial gains. Our soldiers are no longer fighting blind. These gadgets give us predictive edges that jihadists can't match, a Defense Ministry official stated during a press briefing. Historical parallels, such as Mali's partial recoveries in 2013 with French intervention, suggest that consistent pressure could fracture insurgent cohesion, leading to defections and internal schisms. As victories accumulate, projections indicate Burkina Faso could achieve a terrorism-free status by mid-2026, a milestone that would involve not just military dominance but comprehensive peacebuilding. The government plans to reclaim all initially occupied territories, estimated at 40% of the country's landmass at the insurgency's peak, through a combination of kinetic operations and amnesty programs for low-level militants. This reclamation would restore access to vital farmlands in the Sahel belt, where jihadist blockades have displaced farmers and exacerbated food insecurity for millions. Reintegrated areas would see immediate deployments of reconstruction teams, funded by the redirected security budget, to rebuild schools, clinics, and irrigation systems destroyed in years of fighting. Ethnic reconciliation initiatives, addressing grievances among Fulani and Mossi communities, are also on the docket, with Traoré's administration pledging dialogue forums to prevent revenge cycles that have historically fueled recruitment. The ripple effects on development are profound, positioning Burkina Faso as green for investment in a region otherwise mired in volatility. A terrorism-free landscape would attract agribusiness conglomerates to the fertile plains of the Volta River Basin, potentially boosting cotton and sesame exports by 30% within 2 years. Mining operations, already a cornerstone with gold output exceeding 50 tons annually, could expand unhindered, drawing firms from Canada and Australia that have shied away due to kidnap risks. Infrastructure projects, such as the stalled Ouagadougou-Bamako highway upgrade and solar energy grids, would resume, supported by African Development Bank financing once risk premiums drop. Tourism, virtually non-existent since 2019, could revive around UNESCO sites like the ruins of Lorapini, injecting foreign currency and creating jobs in hospitality. Economists forecast a GDP surge to 5 to 7% annually, alleviating poverty rates that currently afflict over 40% of the population and reducing reliance on humanitarian aid, which has totaled billions from organizations like the UNHCR. Internationally, this turnaround could reshape alliances in the Sahel. Neighbors like Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, wary of spillover violence, might deepen economic ties through ECOWAS frameworks, despite Burkina Faso's 2024 withdrawal from the bloc alongside Mali and Niger. Western powers, critiqued for past interventions, could re-engage with technical assistance, while Traoré's pro-Russian stance evolves into a balanced multipolar diplomacy. Human rights groups, however, caution that unchecked military zeal risks abuses, urging transparency in operations to ensure sustainable peace. As forces advance toward the next JNIM bastion, the air is thick with anticipation and uncertainty over whether this momentum can be maintained amid potential counteroffensives. Streets across Burkina Faso have come alive with spontaneous celebrations as news of the military's decisive victories in Somme province spreads like wildfire, igniting a wave of national pride and optimism unseen in years. From the bustling markets of Ouagadougou to the remote villages in the Centre-Nord region, citizens are expressing profound relief and joy over the reclamation of jihadist-held territories, viewing these gains as a long-overdue vindication of homegrown resilience. This outpouring of public support is not only lifting spirits but also injecting fresh confidence into the ranks of Burkinabe soldiers, who are now emboldened to press their advantage in what many describe as a historic turnaround. Achieving in months what French troops, despite a decade-long presence, conspicuously failed to deliver. The people's pleasure is palpable and multifaceted, rooted in the tangible impacts of the recent operations. In Djibo, the epicenter of the clashes, residents who endured years of jihadist extortion and violence have emerged from hiding to dance in the streets, waving the national flag and chanting slogans like "Traoré, our liberator." Local radio stations are flooded with calls from ecstatic listeners sharing stories of renewed hope. Farmers eager to return to their fields without fear of raids, mothers relieved that schools might reopen, and traders anticipating the revival of cross-border commerce stalled by insecurity. Social media platforms, particularly X, formerly Twitter, are abuzz with viral videos of impromptu parades in Bobo Dioulasso, where youth groups organize flash mobs featuring traditional Mossi drums and songs praising the armed forces. "For the first time in a decade, I feel like my children have a future here," said Aissata Ouedraogo, a 42-year-old teacher from Kaya, in an interview with state broadcaster RTB. Her sentiment echoes a broader demographic shift, with polls conducted by local NGOs showing approval ratings for the military junta soaring above 70%, a stark contrast to the disillusionment that preceded the 2022 coup. This grassroots euphoria stems from a collective memory of suffering under jihadist rule, where groups like JNIM imposed draconian taxes, banned music and education for girls, and executed dissenters in public spectacles. The victories, therefore, represent more than territorial gains. They symbolize the reclamation of dignity and autonomy. In urban centers like Ouagadougou, cafes and mosques are hubs for animated discussions, with elders recounting how the military's use of advanced drones and armored vehicles turned the tide, allowing soldiers to outmaneuver militants in ways that restored community trust. Humanitarian workers report a surge in voluntary intelligence tips from civilians, a sign of deepening civilian-military bonds forged in the crucible of shared triumph. Economically marginalized groups, such as the Fulani herders often caught in the crossfire, are cautiously joining the celebrations, with some community leaders publicly endorsing the government's amnesty offers as a pathway to reconciliation. The boost to soldier morale is equally profound, transforming weary troops into a motivated force poised for further advances. Frontline accounts reveal how cheers from liberated villagers have reinvigorated patrols, with soldiers sharing photos of handwritten thank you notes and home-cooked meals provided by grateful locals. "Hearing the people say, 'You've done what others couldn't,' it makes us feel invincible," confided Sergeant Karim Sawadogo, a VDP volunteer involved in the Somme operation. Psychological support programs, expanded under Traoré's reforms, are incorporating these positive reinforcements, with commanders organizing morale-boosting rallies where troops are hailed as national heroes. This confidence surge is manifesting in operational efficiency. Desertion rates, once a plague on the army, have plummeted, and enlistment centers report record sign-ups, drawing young recruits inspired by tales of battlefield prowess. Central to this narrative is the stark comparison with France's decade-long involvement, which many Burkinabe now view as a cautionary tale of foreign inadequacy. Operation Barkhane, launched in 2013 and encompassing over 5,000 French troops at its peak, promised to eradicate jihadist threats across the Sahel but instead presided over an expansion of insurgent control, with attacks multiplying from a few dozen in 2015 to thousands by 2022. Critics point to tactical missteps, over-reliance on airstrikes that caused civilian casualties, intelligence failures that allowed JNIM to consolidate power, and a perceived neo-colonial arrogance that alienated locals. The French came with their helicopters and promises, but left us with more graves and fewer freedoms, lamented Issa Compare, a veteran activist in Ouagadougou, echoing widespread resentment that fueled anti-French protests in 2022. Traoré's expulsion of French forces in 2023, coupled with the pivot to Russian and domestic capabilities, is now celebrated as a masterstroke, with the recent victories underscoring how self-reliance achieved in mere months what external intervention bungled over years. This contrast has amplified nationalistic fervor, with murals in cities depicting Burkinabe soldiers eclipsing faded French emblems, and school curricula being revised to emphasize indigenous heroism. Yet, as jubilant crowds gather and soldiers gear up for the next phases, underlying complexities persist. Skeptics warn that unchecked euphoria could overlook the need for inclusive governance to prevent jihadist resurgence, while international partners monitor for signs of overreach. In the Est region, where operations are ramping up, reports of jubilant welcomes mingle with calls for sustained development aid to cement these gains.